A veteran with serious disabilities may require assistance from another person in order to care for themselves and carry out their daily activities. There is a form of compensation called special monthly compensation based on the need for aid and attendance that VA will pay to veterans under these circumstances. So today, we're going to be talking about the availability of special monthly compensation for veterans who have mental illnesses. And so I think that the first thing we want to discuss is generally what aid and attendance is. So Maura, maybe if you could speak to that.
Yes, so aid and attendance, as Claire mentioned, is one of the criteria that needs to be shown to obtain special monthly compensation benefits at a specific rate designated in 38 U.S. Code 1114. This specific type of SMC benefit is available to a veteran who has service-connected disabilities that prevent their ability to provide for their own care, essentially, in very basic activities of daily living. So those veterans who have service-connected disability limitations that would prevent their ability to bathe, dress themselves, feed themselves, remain ordinarily clean and presentable, adjust their own prosthetic appliances if that's relevant, and keep themselves safe from hazards in their daily environment. Those veterans who have service-connected limitations that prevent their ability to do that, at least on a regular basis, might be entitled to special monthly compensation based on that need for aid and attendance. There are some activities of daily living that a lot of people think of that are not the kind that are contemplated by the regulation for SMC A&A, which is what we call aid and attendance. Those things you might think of as chores, grocery shopping, laundry, even taking care of your own finances. We see a lot of veterans with limitations in those areas, but those are not the kind of things that are contemplated by the A&A regulations. It's really more about the very basic activities of daily living, like I mentioned, bathing, grooming, dressing, things like that. And one thing that we would caution is that if a veteran submits any evidence that they do have trouble with finances, which is something we might talk about in a few minutes when we talk more about psychiatric limitations, individuals who are coordinating with VA, trying to get benefits, and who are asserting that they have trouble paying their bills or finances should be aware that that could be something that VA uses to trigger a proposal of incompetency. So we talk about this in separate platforms, but just for today, an incompetency proposal can come from a finding that the veteran is not able to maintain their own finances on their own. So that's just something to be aware of. If you are seeking SMC and that's a fact in your record, that might be something that you want to be prepared for just in case VA does interpret it that way.
Right. Yeah. And I guess a question that a lot of veterans and their advocates might have is if there's any kind of requirement that aid and attendance is provided by a trained medical professional, like a doctor or a nurse.
It's a good question. That is not a requirement for aid and attendance. So if you have a caregiver that is working with you that's not a medical professional, but they are providing you regular aid and attendance, that person does not need to be a licensed medical professional. The licensed medical professional component is something that comes into play with other levels of SMC, but for our purposes today, we're talking about aid and attendance, and you do not have to have someone providing medical care or licensed medical care to you to qualify for aid and attendance. You also don't need a full-time caregiver in order to qualify for aid and attendance. Of course, veterans that have a full-time caregiver because of their service-connected conditions may qualify for this benefit, but the regulation states that it's only regular aid and attendance that needs to be provided to veterans who need it due to service-connected conditions. So it doesn't need to be constant. There's nothing in the regulation that talks about daily aid and attendance. The word that the regulation uses is regular. So in cases that we handle, we advocate for veterans who are receiving regular aid from a host of different people in their lives, a child, a parent, a spouse, a nephew, a niece, or something like that. If that aid and attendance is regular and it provides assistance with the activities of daily living that we talked about a few minutes ago, then that's something that may entitle them to SMC.
And Maura, is there a way for veterans to receive SMC A&A if their spouse requires this level of care? Is that another benefit that would be available?
Yes, so if a veteran has a dependent spouse, that veteran can get dependency benefits for their spouse. They may also be entitled to a higher rate of dependency benefits for that spouse if that spouse requires A&A themselves. So if aid and attendance is something that the veteran spouse needs, then that could increase the veteran's dependency benefit. This gets a little confusing even for us day to day because usually when we talk about A&A and the type of attendance and assistance that's needed for veterans, we're talking about the veteran themselves. But there is that pathway to a higher dependency benefit for a spouse that requires aid and attendance.
Yeah, it's good to know. I mean, that's a situation that people may find themselves in, and that's an additional benefit that they could be entitled to.
Exactly.
So I think that a question that we hear is whether or not someone can qualify for SMC based on the need for aid and attendance if they have a mental health condition, either alone or in combination with other service-connected conditions. What would be some requirements for aid and attendance that would qualify for a mental health disability?
So if a veteran is applying for benefits based on aid and attendance, it's important to note that VA is going to examine any of the veteran service-connected disability limitations. It's often the case that veterans are service-connected for mental health conditions alongside other things, but some veterans are only service-connected for a mental health condition. That's fine too. The bottom line is that VA needs to look at all of the veteran service-connected conditions and the limitations that those conditions cause in determining whether they need the regular aid and attendance of another person. So if a veteran is service-connected for a mental health condition, they may be able to qualify for SMC A&A if they have psychiatric impairment that would prevent their ability to keep themselves clean and presentable, to keep themselves safe from dangers incident in their daily environments, and things along those lines. So some examples of things that might come into play with a veteran who suffers from a mental health condition or a psychiatric illness that is service-connected are memory loss. So the effects of memory loss could include a veteran forgets to turn off the stove or an oven or some sort of heating device that, if left unattended and on, could cause an unsafe or a hazard in their environment. That would track with the language of the regulation, which specifically talks about the ability to keep one safe from hazards incident in your daily environment. There's also the possibility that veterans who experience suicidal and homicidal ideation might have trouble keeping themselves or others safe in a similar way. So that's a fact that might be used to show that that veteran needs another person to keep themselves safe from the threat of self-harm or harm to others. Also, memory loss is something that might affect a veteran's ability to take their medication. This is something that we have had success in arguing and presenting evidence to the VA about. If a veteran has a service-connected condition that prevents their ability to remember to reliably take their medications, then that type of memory loss could impede their ability, again, to keep themselves safe, if safety really does hinge on their ability or the need for the medications that they've been prescribed. And in addition to that, one more example comes to mind, and that is the ability to keep oneself ordinarily clean and presentable. Sometimes veterans with mental health conditions experience such low motivation or such deficiencies in their motivation that they simply are not motivated to bathe, dress, groom themselves. So if they need another person to help them do that because of a service-connected mental health condition, then they may qualify for SMC A&A based on that criteria.
So if this sounds like it might be the case for a veteran, what are some things that he or she might do to improve or develop their claim so that it's something that VA is going to grant for them? What are some things that they can do to improve their claim?
Well, it's important to present evidence that speaks to these limitations. That evidence can come from lay persons, so a veteran themselves may be able to report as to the extent of their service-connected conditions, the limitations that they cause, and the effects of those conditions on their ability to perform their activities of daily living. So a lay statement from the veteran who is in this position of having this difficulty should maybe memorialize their experience in writing for VA. That can be a particularly helpful piece of evidence. Beyond that, if a veteran does work with a caregiver, a helper, anyone who's in the position of rendering them the aid and attendance that they need, statements from those individuals can be particularly helpful as well. In our experience, we find that particularly persuasive evidence in these kinds of cases does come from that person who's providing that regular aid and attendance to the veteran. If they can describe what kind of help that they provide, how often they're providing assistance, and sort of what that assistance entails for the veteran, then they have the ability to speak to the veteran's circumstances, what they observe through their knowledge of taking care of the veteran. And we have found, like I said, that that's been particularly persuasive evidence. Also, medical evidence can be really helpful too. This is sort of a tricky area to be getting medical evidence because when you're at the doctor's office, they're not really digging deep into questions about what types of activities of daily living can't you perform, and beyond that, how often are you receiving regular assistance from someone? Which is why lay evidence can come into play quite a bit in these cases. But if you do have medical evidence that speaks to the limitations that you have, if it's a psychiatric or mental health limitation, for example, if doctors are noting that you have profound memory loss or difficulties with motivation, or even suicidal or homicidal ideation that could render you a danger to self or others, then that type of evidence could be compelling because it would speak to the criteria in the regulation concerning A&A about your inability to take care of yourself, keep yourself safe, keep yourself ordinarily clean and presentable. There is a specific form that VA likes to see when they adjudicate A&A cases. Again, that's aid and attendance, just in case we're using too many acronyms. It's the 2680 form. On VA's website, you can find this form. They have a specific forms page of their website, so you can just type in 2680 in the search bar and it should come up for you. But this will be a list of questions that a clinician could fill out on a veteran's behalf that talks about the types of difficulties that the veteran encounters with day-to-day activities of daily living stemming from service-connected conditions. So we know that VA loves their forms. That's a form that VA likes to see in these cases, so that can very, very much help a claim. But it's important to remember if you're working with a medical professional to fill out that form, that you're limiting the scope of the analysis to service-connected conditions and limitations, because again, it has to be that the service-connected disabilities that a veteran has renders them unable to provide their own care for themselves, such that they need the regular aid and attendance of another person.
Right. I think that we'll stop there, but we hope that you found this video helpful. If you did, please be sure to like the video and follow our channel for more information. And don't forget that you can also find more information on our website at cck-law.com. Thank you for watching and take care.